Richard Roberts here, welcoming you to the wonderful world of Weiss-O-Rama. I wanted to call it Weiss-A-Roni, but the producers nixed it. Film historian David Shepard has a law that essentially states the more obscure, unloved, and unwanted a silent film is, the better the surviving print material will be. Which means, basically, well, London After Midnight remains a lost film while we're searching for any surviving print at all of Hats Off with Laurel and Hardy, while something like The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Lon Chaney only survives, and worn 16mm show-at-home prints blown up in 35mm. The entire comedy canon of the Weiss Brothers Art Class Producing Company survives in pristine original nitrate negatives, 35mm fine grains, and master positives. Go figure. And yeah, the purists can scoff, wondering why we're even wasting our time with these low-budget, low comedies starring comedians who, if their career shelf lives weren't expired, they were certainly getting close to their sell-by date. But after personally going through dozens to hundreds of the Weiss Brothers comedy shorts and helping select and put together this collection, and you're welcome, because I saved you from some real turkeys like the Cracker Jack comedies that Robert Tansey produced, and the kid comedies and the chimp comedies. We've basically separated the wheat from the chaff, and we've given you the creme de la stuff, I guess. No, these comedies are not that bad, dang it. And, if you're one of those pretentious types who thinks that silent comedy begins and ends with the Three Kings, go elsewhere. Don't bug us. We're going to have some fun. These are actually pretty good comedies, and you're never going to see silent comedies in this kind of condition. I mean, they are gorgeous. They look like they were shot yesterday. The great thing about the Weiss Brother comedies, in fact, they are low budget, but that means that they're shot on the real LA streets quite frequently, in real locations. We get wonderful looks at Hollywood in the 1920s, and you're going to see a number of, pretty well-known names, comedians like Ben Turpin, Snub Pollard, Jimmy Aubrey, comedians who should be remembered, like Poodles Hannaford, and they're in an area of their career that most people really don't know a lot about, and you will be entertained. Oh yes, you will. Sit down and enjoy yourself. Now, let's discuss this one, Cockeyed Family. We're starting with Ben Turpin, probably because Ben was the most well-known name that ever worked for the Weiss Brothers, and somewhat amazingly, because Ben, the year before this film, which was made in 1928, was Mack Sennett's biggest star. And an interesting story about how one goes from being Mack Sennett's biggest comedy star to working for the Weiss Brothers in just a year. It's got this film, Cockeyed Family. Political correctness goes right out the door here. Let's face it, another reason I love the film. Also, let's face it, if political correctness had been around then, Ben Turpin probably wouldn't have had a career. Yes, we're making fun of a disability, but that disability made Ben quite a lot of money. And apart from the fact that he was also, a very good comedian, a very important comedian historically in American film. And, like I said, it's just fascinating to see, him working. But he really was quite possibly the first American film comedian. And we'll go into that. Some other cast members here. Vera White is playing the wife. She may be recognizable to Laurel and Hardy fans, comic actors. Her most famous part is playing one of the two Scarlet Women who Stan and Ollie go out with in the 1928 comedy We Fought Down. She's the one who flirts with Ollie on their little afternoon escapade away from the wives. I think it's interesting, kind of political correctness aside again, the Cockeyed Family. All right, now, did Ben go out and find a cross-eyed woman and marry her, or is it one of those things like, when married couples are together a long time, they start to look alike? I don't know. And in fact, the kids now, is that a genetic thing? What are we talking about here? The kids, interestingly enough, the older one is a child actor named Sherman Jr. He was known as Junior Bailey. But not a real well-known kid actor, but you see him in silent comedies. He turns up places like Universal. I'm not sure. He's in one of the Our Gang ripoff series. I'm actually not sure which one. I think it may be the McDougal Alley Kids. The baby is another very well-known name. That's a very young Billy Barty, and Billy Barty didn't get much taller, but he's only 4 years old here, and this is actually some of his first film work. He got started working for the Weiss brothers. He works in several of the Ben Turpin comedies. You see him in one called Idolize. You also see him working with Snub Pollard. I know he's in one Snub Pollard Weiss brother called No Kidding. Billy Barty, of course, had another long career in motion pictures. Vera White, you saw most in the silent era. I'm not sure really what happened to her after Talkies. You see her working at Roach in the early 1920s. She appears in things like Harold Lloyd's Among Those Present. She's in some of the Eddie Boland comedies like Sweet By and By. She also appears in what was basically the pilot film for Our Gang. It was a starring comedy with Ernie Sunshine Sammy Morrison called, and excuse me, political correctness, but I didn't write the title, The Pickaninny. And that kind of disappears toward the end of the 20s. Then you see her in bit parts and extra work, mostly in Hal Roach films in the 30s. But she seems to have retired. Oh, here's the villain getting out of the car now. That's Arthur Rowlands, who was also worked at the Senate and Universal. He worked in Universal Century Comedies. He was actually working for the Weiss brothers in some of the westerns that Lester F. Scott was producing for distribution for them through Action Pictures at the time. Some of the others, Buddy Roosevelt, he's in Lightning Shot and Mystery Valley. But he kind of worked as a comic villain or a western villain pretty steadily. You see him in some Laurel and Hardy Hal Roach things, in the Laurel and Hardy murder case. He works at Hal Roach some in the 30s. Basically, at the end of the 30s, he became a stuntman at Warner Brothers and worked there until his, unfortunately, rather early death in 1944. Now, getting back to Ben Turpin. Ben Turpin is definitely a very important comedian in the history of silent comedy. And as I said, there is an argument for him being the first American silent film comic star. He was older than a lot of the other film comedians, born in New Orleans in 1869, of French descent. His father was a confectioner, candy store owner. And Ben's show business career goes way back into the 1880s and 90s. He basically lived began his teenage and early adult years as a hobo. Kind of traveled around the country, and got gradually into show business, working in burlesque and vaudeville, and working in really kind of the low end of that area of show business, but working for a long time. He toured all around the country playing a cartoon character, a comic strip character called Happy Hooligan, and he did that into like the 1890s into the 1900s. But he got into films in 1907, and he went to work. He was 38 years old. He went to work for the Esney Film Company in Chicago, working as an actor in the daytime and as their janitor in the evenings, and was starring in early American short comedies for Esney, 1907, with no billing, because I don't think Esney was really giving billing. They may have given him credit. Actually, there's an article he wrote for, I believe it was the Motion Picture World around 1909, talking about going out to California, scouting locations for the S&A company, and talking about working in pictures. But some of those early S&As survived too. There's one called Mr. Flip, which has been basically playing a masher, going around molesting women in grocery stores and things until everybody turns on him and attacks him. And here's some classic Weiss brother type comedy. The egg in the face. Like I said, again, political correctness and good taste, never a part of the Weiss brothers. Another reason why we love them. But Ben was working, like I said, for S&A for a couple of years, and finally got tired of it. I don't know, just felt like there wasn't any advancement or what, but he left S&A in late 1909. It was thought he went off immediately into vaudeville, but actually he hung around Chicago, went to work for the Imp Company, which was the forerunner of Universal. A couple of years ago, I and some of my colleagues going through some nitrates at UCLA came across a 1910 Imp called the Hobble Skirt, which had Ben Turpin in drag, actually, but proved that he was still working around the Chicago area. Oh, speaking of questionable taste, this is a scene that coming up here. Something you thought you'd never see, Billy Barty's bare ass. I think it's something Ben never thought he'd see either here. Oh boy. Well, we're not sure these Weiss brothers, because basically they were states' right at independence, ever really got by the state censor sometime. But we're going to see occasional lapses in taste like that. But anyway, Turpin did go back on the road doing Happy Hooligan again, late 1910, 11, 12. I guess he finally really did get tired of that. I think he sort of realized it was a hard way to make a living. Maybe motion pictures were a little easier. And so in 1913, he went back to S&A, where they rehired him, put him to work supporting, of all people, Wallace Beery, who was playing a character named Sweetie in drag. I'll give you a second to get over the visual image of Wallace Beery in drag. Yeah, kind of scary. But the Sweetie comedies were actually pretty popular, and Ben was a supporting comic in those in Chicago in 1913 and 14. Again, not getting a lot of attention for himself, but, working steadily as a comedian. Things got a little better for Ben around 1915 when S&A signed Charles Chaplin, stole him away from the Keystone Company. And Chaplin came to Chicago to make his first picture for S&A, which was a comedy set in a movie studio called His New Job. And he cast Ben Turpin as one of the main players, almost really as his foil in the picture. And Ben got some good critical attention. I mean, and again, Chaplin was, even at that time, a very popular star, so His New Job played all over the place, and that really did boost Ben's career. Helped it further when Chaplin moved after doing his one comedy at the S&A studio in Chicago. He didn't like the weather in Chicago, so he moved out to the S&A studios in Niles, California, which is up near Fremont, San Francisco area. And Ben went with him. And this was actually the studio in Niles where Bronco Billy Anderson, who was one of the owners of S&A, was shooting his Bronco Billy pictures. And Turpin and Chaplin actually worked practically as a team in Chaplin's second S&A picture, A Night Out. And again, Turpin got very good reviews. He works in Chaplin's third S&A comedy, The Champion. And basically, by that point, Chaplin kind of, I think, thinks Turpin is getting a little more attention than he needs to be getting in Chaplin's comedies. So Ben gets put to work making other comedies in S&A. Actually, Wallace Beery had come out, and they do a few Sweeties out there. And Ben also finds himself working in the Snakeville comedies. Now, the Snakeville comedies was a very popular, sort of a rural comedy series that SNA was putting out. Originally starred Augustus Carney, played Alkali Ike, and then also featured people like Victor Potel, Margaret Jocelyn, and very, very popular series. And Harry Todd, who was Margaret Jocelyn's husband, he was in them. So Turpin is playing in these. He creates a character called Bloggy, who sort of becomes a regular in Snakevilles. Again, he's getting a little more attention. He's working. He's doing pretty well. Continues in this through 1915. Actually, the Niles, where there is a museum called the Niles Film Museum, which is preserving the history of the studio when they were shooting there in the mid-teens, have a lot of pictures of Ben Turpin being involved with like local charity things. And apparently he was very popular in the Niles area, unlike Chaplin, who was considered sort of stuck up and kind of somebody you had to keep away from your daughters and that sort of thing. But yeah, Turpin was very well liked up there. And like I said, he seems to be very happy working at SNA. He actually does work with Chaplin again, although Chaplin didn't realize it, because toward the end of Chaplin's SNA career, Chaplin made a two-reel picture called Burlesque on Carmen, which was Chaplin's spoof of the opera Carmen. And SNA took Chaplin's edited two-reeler and shot 2 more reels of footage with Ben Turpin and intercut it, making the Burlesque on Carmen a 4-reel feature. So once again, Chaplin and Turpin work together, but if you watch real carefully, you notice they're never in the same frame. And sometimes the editing's actually very clever in that. But that was actually one of Turpin's last SNA pictures, because he moved on to the Vogue company, who hired him in 1916 to star in his first starring series, a series released by the Mutual Film Corporation. There he was working with a comedian and circus clown by the name of Rube Miller, and worked at Vogue through 1916 and a big chunk of 1917, and did very well there. Again, starring, the films were first 1-reelers and became 2-reelers in late 1916, and were a reasonably popular product on the Mutual Film Company schedule. Now we'll get back to Ben's career here in a while. Should talk a bit about Billy Barty, because Billy Barty, again, was had a very long career, and I think he's very good in this short, even if he does have to lose his pants or diapers, whatever, in a scene. His real name, William John Berdenzetti. Again, like I said, he was 4 years old at the time he started here in pictures with the Weiss brothers. He worked here for, not a real long time, several months. I said made a handful of shorts, and went over to work for Larry Darmore at Standard Cinema, making the Mickey McGuire comedies. He was appearing with another youngster by the name of Mickey Rooney, and playing Mickey's kid brother, and worked quite steadily in those films into talkies into the early 30s, about 33, 34, when the series ended. But yeah, Barty worked very busily as a child star. Like I said, unfortunately didn't get much taller. I think he was 3'9" at adulthood. And you see him in other films in the 30s. You see him in Footlight Parade. He's in a couple of musical numbers there. I always think when he was a child, he looked like an old Spencer Tracy in miniature. But he worked in pictures pretty steadily. Then basically ended up in vaudeville. And after that, really didn't get back into pictures till he got back into TV in the 50s. You saw him a lot in television in the 50s. He worked with the Spike Jones Band for a while. In fact, he does the mean impression of Liberace on the Spike Jones show in the 50s. He had a long career in television, movies, basically up till his death in 2000. You see him in things like Under the Rainbow with Chevy Chase. He plays a villain in that. I don't know what other films, Day of the Locust. Where I think he's a manager of the cockfights in Day of the Locust. He would take on interesting parts, both dramatic and comic. Met him a couple of times. Have a nice autograph still in my office of him. An autograph still of him holding up the Mickey McGuire schoolhouse and all the cast in front of him. Very nice man. Oh, there's William McCall playing the policeman there. Senate supporting actor. And they're shooting here. That's Larchmont Avenue. We're going to see a lot of Larchmont Avenue in these films coming up. Weiss Brothers, I think, actually had an office or studio somewhere around Larchmont because they use it quite a bit. This film actually is sort of a reworking of a Mack Sennett comedy called Hoboken to Hollywood, 1926 Sennett comedy directed by Del Ward, stars Billy Bevan. The whole thing about going across country and having the problems, just very similar. We'll talk more about Ben in the next picture.